Excellent. We're carrying our message of a strong national defense, enforceable borders. I built that border fence in San Diego, the law to take it across Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas.
I was a missionary in Guatemala, and I watched a lot of things in those years, so I'm very grateful for what you've done.
Wow. Well, listen, we've got a ton of folks coming across illegally, some of whom are committing crimes in the United States, and we also have a major exposure to terrorism on the southern border. You know, in 2005, we caught 155,000 people coming across from Mexico who were not citizens of Mexico. They came from every country in the world, including 1,100 from communist China and a few from Iran and North Korea. So we got to build that border fence. I built the fence in San Diego that works so well, and I wrote the law that takes that fence, that San Diego fence, 854 miles across Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas. If you want that fence built, you need to elect me president. I'll do it in 6 months.
You know, I believe in the fence. I've been of the old Panakiva, which is a school. My mentor was Shelli Katz-Nelson. She came in runner-up for the Nobel Peace Prize in 1993. And one of our pet projects was Ariel, that has one of the security fences in Israel. And I know firsthand that those fences are very, very critical for the survival of people in democracy.
Yeah, you know, we've got to have the ability to know who's coming in our country and what they're bringing with them. And we have the biggest open door, front door in the world. That is legal immigration. No other country immigrates as many people as we do legally. So we've got that big front door, but we've got to have sides on the house. That means we need a fence, roads, lights, border patrolmen, and if people want to come in, they've got to knock on the front door.
I like that. And what do they do once they get in? How do we handle the amnesty issue? How do we handle the unemployment and the Social Security?
Well, you know, I think that people that are here illegally have to leave. We gave amnesty to 3 million people in the 1980s. And, you know, when we did that, we said, now this is it. This time we really mean it. This time we're going to abide by our laws. Nobody else will be allowed to come in. And if you come in, you'll be deported. And, you know, that was written on a sign that basically had tire tracks left on it, as another 12 million people who didn't believe that we really meant it came into this country illegally. If we give amnesty to this next 12 million people that are in here right now, you'll have a third wave coming in, stampeding for the borders, expecting to catch the third amnesty. We've got to establish the currency of our national laws, and you do that by enforcing them. And you know something else? A lot of liberals say, well, they'll be homeless if you deport them. Actually, the great majority who come in have real homes, and that's why leaders in Mexico want to keep an open border, because people that come across here send their money back, their cash back to their real homes. So the liberals are a little bit arrogant in that they presume that people came here only to live and don't have homes in other countries. They absolutely do, and the vast majority of them will go home to their real homes if, in fact, we make it be known that we really do intend to enforce our laws. But that has to start with an enforceable border. If you have no border fence and no border patrol to speak of, when you deport somebody at 2 o'clock, they may be back by 6 p.m. So we're a little bit like a boat that's got a big hole in it. We're bailing water furiously. What you have to do is plug the hole in the boat. I'll do that as president. Build the border fence that I wrote into law last year that the president signed. I'll have construction crews in every state working on it, in Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, and California. We'll build that border fence in 6 months, and when people want to come into the U.S., they'll have to knock on the front door.
That's very good. You know, I lived in Texas for quite a long time and worked for some guys that put the men on the moon from NASA. And I did a lot of church work down there, too, so I had an experience quite often to witness firsthand the truckloads full of immigrants that would show up overnight, and there they would be, you know, working in the fields, keeping all the Texas ranches going, and most of them were illegal immigrants. And I know firsthand that many of those families were there to send money back to other people across the other side of the border. But you know something else I'm really concerned about? I had my credit stolen a few years ago by somebody in Bangladesh who shipped it off to Uruguay, and somebody else who was using it in Taiwan, and it was someone that had been used by one of these companies that outsource to India. And I'm getting so tired of calling up for customer service. I can't speak to someone in a crisis in my own language because I can't really understand them. You know, they speak too quickly or the accent's too heavy. And then here I am giving my most critical credit card information and ID away to someone in a foreign country. What do you think about that issue?
Well, you know, I think that the total outsourcing is a bad thing for this country. You know, I'm one of the few Republicans that believes that we are moving our industrial base offshore, and we're pushing manufacturing away, and that is high-paying jobs. The last analysis showed that we've moved 1.8 million jobs from America to communist China. Now, as chairman of the Armed Services Committee, I'm concerned that a couple of years ago, when I looked at the trying to get high-grade steel for our Humvees to protect our guys against roadside bombs in Iraq, I could only find one steel company left in America that could still make it. So as we push this industrial base offshore, we're losing the ability to make military equipment. So I would stop China from cheating on trade, and I would put in place what I call mirror trade with the rest of the world. And that is, if other countries have 20% tariffs that they charge our producers to send our goods to their country, they're going to see that their own tariff reflected back at them when they try to sell their goods in our country. The days of the one-way street will be over.
Excellent. You're just going to make them knock on every door. I like that. Show up and be polite for a change and fair. You know, I also work with a honorary ambassador from the nation of Nagaland. It's one of 7 nations that are satellite nations around India, which calls itself the largest democracy and largest democracy in the world. It's broken over 37 of the UN resolutions that are demanded for something to actually be a democracy and fulfill those requirements and step in those shoes. They were given their liberty by England when England vacated after the war at Kohima. They were the veterans that fought with the Allied forces and stopped the Japanese. The next day after the independent services were over, Indian insurgents came over and said, no, you don't. You know, you're not going to have the liberty. You're the only buffer between Tibet and China. So they've been in a 59-year war. They're the only Christian nation in that entire Indian continent, and most Americans have never heard of them. I was over there 2 years ago, went with a mission that has upgraded their status from freedom fighters to people standing for liberty with the State Department. We were just at the Senate caucus building with Senator Dan Burton and others and the leader of the Congress. And we were so disappointed because when President Bush got into office, he spoke about putting an end to the atrocities that go on in the name of democracy hidden in foreign countries. If you become president of the United States, what will you do with those issues? I mean, I understand we have to court India and Pakistan because they have nuclear power, but it seems that we are ignoring people who are crying out for the liberty and democracy we have.
Yeah, well, you know, I think we always have to support liberty and democracy, and you've got to balance that with exposure of American forces. And that means that you've got to realize that when you send American forces in to enforce freedom, like we've done in Iraq, you take casualties. So it's got to be a very clear-headed decision. Use American technology wherever possible and train people to fight for their own freedom. Teach a man to fish, don't just give him one.